You all here? Yeah, come on up, slide up here, guys. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I want to thank particularly Congressman Brady for helping to pull together this event today. Also want to thank others of my colleagues who are here. Leader McConnell is going to be here momentarily. The ranking member of the Senate Finance Committee, Senator Hatch, our leader on the committee, is here. Representative McIntyre is here. And my Congresswoman from the state of South Dakota, Kristi Noem, who has some interesting personal, real-life insights on this particular issue, is here as well. And Kenny Marchant is here as well. And Dean Heller, where did Dean go? Oh, Dean did make it in. But I also want to thank the various business organizations that are represented here today. We have with us the Family Business Estate Tax Coalition, the Family Business Coalition, and the Policy and Taxation Group. I want to thank them for all their support and their work in helping us advance this issue, and you're going to be hearing from some representatives from some of those organizations later. And finally, I need to thank John Kyle, who is no longer here in the Senate, but was the leader on death tax repeal during his time in the United States Senate, and those of us who are still here are trying to take up that mantle and make sure that we continue the fight to repeal the death tax once and for all. Let me just say very briefly by way of introduction before I yield to some of my colleagues here that we don't believe death ought to be a taxable event. If you look at what families go through when they're in a grieving process, it's really ironic that we penalize and punish them through the tax code after they've worked really hard over a lifetime to build up some equity, some assets that they hope to be able to pass on to the next generation. Imposing a tax rate as high as 40% is just not bad for our economy. It's unfair to those families who have saved and built literally for generations, and are creating jobs out there at the same time they're doing that. Currently, 70% of small businesses fail in the second generation and 90% fail in the third generation. A CBO report released in 2009 said that 1/3 of family businesses who owed the estate tax, the death tax, actually owed more in taxes than they had in liquid assets. So that kind of tells you what families are up against when they get hit with this tax. And that's certainly the case in the Midwest, in my home state of South Dakota, where we've seen land values go up in the last 5 years by 50%. And so you've got an awful lot of farm and ranch operators that are land rich and cash poor, and end up getting stuck with the death tax, and makes it very, very difficult for them to keep that in the family. And they end up, in many cases, having to liquidate some of those assets in order to pay the IRS. We don't think that's fair. We think that we ought to give family farmers and ranchers and small business people, those who work hard to build up that over a lifetime, the opportunity to pass that on to the next generation. And so getting rid of the death tax once and for all would enable us to do that. And so that's what we're here to talk about today, and the legislation that we've introduced here in the Senate and that Kevin has introduced in the House, we hope to get the opportunity to move in the not-too-distant future. Leader McConnell is going to be here in a minute, as I mentioned, but until he gets here, I want to introduce my friend, somebody that I came into Congress with years ago, and somebody that has been a great representative, a great voice, someone who articulates, I think, the importance of getting rid of the death tax and what it means to our economy, what it means to jobs, what it means to hardworking family farms and ranches. But he's a great leader in the House, Kevin Brady.
Well, first let me thank Senator Thune for his leadership in the Senate. He's been a champion on this issue since the first day he came to Congress, and continues to be that, frankly, and has put together a Senate leadership team on this issue that is so critical. And I want to thank the bipartisan members of the House, Mike and others who are here today as well, and those who are affected by this tax. I want to make two quick points. One, this tax is terribly unfair. It's unfair to families that saved, family-owned farms, family-owned businesses. I mean, can you imagine you work your whole life to build up a nest egg, to build up a family-owned farm or business, and when you die, Uncle Sam swoops in and takes nearly half of everything you've worked your life to save for. It's just wrong and unfair. This tax is an immoral tax that needs to be repealed once and for all. And the second point, this tax is damaging to the economy and not helpful to balancing the budget. every study shows that the death tax, the cost it implies, the regulation and the extra added cost to families, that we actually have taken more in the 96 years of this tax out of the economy because of this tax than what it's generated in revenue. And so it's time to stop draining the economy on behalf of this tax. And because this tax barely pays for 2 to 3 days of federal spending over the year, the damage that it creates far exceeds any benefit it has for revenue. So it is time to end this very unfair tax. We're going to continue as we go about tax reform, making this a high priority to eliminate the death tax once and for all. We're going to need bipartisan support to do it. And with that, I'm very proud to recognize and introduce the lead Republican, the ranking member of the Tax Writing Finance Committee in the Senate, and a champion on this issue as well, Senator Hatch.
This is a very unfair tax, and I endorse what both John and Kevin have said. Fact of the matter is that if we don't do something about it, 2,400 farms are going to be hit this year, and about 2,700 small businesses. Now, in the case of the family farm, they work all their lives. Their equity is completely in the family farm, and then we go and take almost half of it away. Unless they are wealthy enough to hire really, really good lawyers who can help them to avoid these kind of things. My friend Warren Buffett, and I get together with him every once in a while, I doubt that he's going to pay much in the way of estate taxes because he can afford to hire the best lawyers in the world, and he'll avoid most of it just because of that. But the average family farmer just can't do that. Neither can the average family business. And when you start thinking about 2,400 farms that could be very hit this year, very badly, that's what they estimate, that's what Joint Tax Committee estimates, and 2,700 small businesses, it brings home to you just how serious this is. And we don't get that much from it. It might be one thing if it would help us to pay down the national debt, but I guarantee you they'll just take the money and spend it anyway, and it isn't that much. And I just believe this is one of the worst taxes that we can possibly have, and I hope that in a bipartisan way that our friends on the other side and our fellow Republicans and fellow Democrats will do everything they can this year to get rid of this dog. And if we do that, I think it would push us on down the line to get true tax reform done. Because if we could do that, it would mean that there'd be a lot of other things we could do to bring tax reform to the forefront and hopefully get this country zooming again. I'm really honored to be with all these good people here standing before you, and this is a great privilege for me. This is a very, very important bill. I also honor our friend John Cowell. We miss him greatly. But John Thune is taking this over on our committee, and he's doing a great job. And our House compatriots are terrific as far as I'm concerned. So we're going to do everything we can to get rid of this, and if we can, it'll be a much better thing for our nation.
Thanks, Warren. Congressman Mike McIntyre. Thank you.
Well, I'm pleased to join all my colleagues up here, and I know Kevin Brady and John Thune and I go back to the same class together in the House, and we've all long fought to get rid of the estate tax. And when we think about it, folks, it boils down to this. It's the wrong tax at the wrong time, hurting the wrong people. The very backbone of what makes America great are these family small businesses that for generations, literally in generations, have come to make small towns in America, as well as some of the larger cities in America. But I know, especially being from rural eastern North Carolina, what it has meant, where 99% of our businesses in North Carolina are small businesses. In fact, at the worst time in a family's life, as I've often said to people back to home, the government reaches into your back pocket and takes out the hard-earned money that your family has made and that you were hoping to pass on to the next generation. And I know many families personally who have second, third, and fourth generation businesses who have succeeded because of what they've put into it, not what the government has taken out of it. And when we talk about over $88 million in compliance costs and 2.3 million hours spent just to comply with this tax that is unfairly hurting small business and family farms, it's clearly time to get rid of it. So this bipartisan, bicameral effort, I think, speaks for itself. Isn't that nice to hear that term today? Bipartisan and bicameral. Not many things, unfortunately, you can say about that, but this is clearly one of them, and I'm glad to stand here with my friends to do just that. Thank you very much.
Christy Nolan from South Dakota.
Well, when I was 21 years old, I was a college student, and my dad was killed in an accident on our farm. He was 49 years old, and it devastated our family. I had an older sister who was living in Georgia, an older brother who was in Oklahoma, and a younger brother that was still in high school. So for me, the job was left up to me to come back to the operation and take it over and figure out a way to take our family business that had been in our family for generations and keep it successful. I was shocked when I got a bill from the federal government that said because a tragedy happened to my family, I now owed them thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. Now, my dad was a cowboy, and he was tough, and he had always raised us with the idea that you don't sell land because God isn't making any more land. We had land that had been in our family for generations that my grandpa had bought, that my great-grandfather had bought. We had machinery, we had cattle, but that didn't mean we had any money in the bank. So I was forced with a very big decision. Either we sell land that had been in our family for generations to pay that bill, or I take out a loan. I chose to take out a loan, but for 10 years, I paid on that loan to pay the federal government what I owed them in death taxes, and it made it very difficult for our family business to survive. It made me angry. And actually, it's the reason why I ran for office. I realized then that people in Washington, D.C., a lot of times have absolutely no clue how their policies and their laws impact the real people back home, and that we needed more everyday people who really knew what the ramifications of bad policy are to come here and to fight for what is right. So ever since I've been involved in agriculture, ever since I've been involved in legislating, as long as I'm going to be advocating for businesses, for farms and ranches, I'm going to talk about the death tax because it is one of those policies that overnight can take a family business away from a family and make sure that it doesn't have the chance to come back or to recover. I certainly hope that we can gain some traction and continue to get this bill pushed to the forefront. The House is dealing with tax reform. It's on the front burner for us, and this is a key component to it. So I'm very thrilled to be a part of this delegation up here today talking about such important policy to rural America.
Thanks, Christy. Leader Mitch McConnell.
Thanks, Sean. Thank Christy. Go. Senator. Well, let me just add my voice to those of others. I've always felt the death tax was the government's final outrage, that you had to visit both the undertaker and the IRS on the same day. And if you think about it, as I just heard Christy saying as I walked in, the impact of this is largely felt by people who look like they have a lot of money on paper, but in fact are really confronted with a heck of a challenge in getting the family farm and the small business down to the next generation. We made a little progress earlier this year and 2 years ago, not nearly enough, but a little progress. 2 years ago, in December of 2010, Joe Biden and I negotiated a 2-year extension of the Bush tax cuts, and I was able to get included in there a $5 million per person exemption. And that exemption, of course, would only last for 2 years. I reminded people during that period you didn't have to die to take advantage of it. You could use it in advance. You just couldn't use it again later. But the question was, could we get any kind of permanency on that or something better? At the end of the year, I ended up with Joe Biden again on the fiscal cliff deal, and we did get the $5 million exemption, index for inflation, permanent law. But the death tax shouldn't exist at all. And I don't think any of us will rest easy until we get rid of the government's final outrage. And so I'm here to proudly support my colleague John Thune and the others who are behind us in trying to end the death tax once and for all. Thanks for the chance to be here.
Thanks, Leader. Next up, we want to hear from some small businesses that are impacted, and we have with us Karen Madonia, who's Chief Financial Officer for a company called Ilco Incorporated. Share her story. Where's Karen at? There you are. Sorry. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you. I'm told that it's Small Business Week in America, and as such, I want to thank Senator Thune and Congressman Brady for addressing a problem which continues to impact many small and family-owned businesses across the country, the estate tax. Let me start with some background. My family owns a small business in Illinois. It was a very small company when my dad purchased it back in 1973. At that time, he was only 32 years old, with a wife, 3 daughters, and a mortgage, but he knew he wanted something more than just a job. He wanted to use his passion to create something permanent, to be in control of his own destiny. With help from my grandfather, my dad decided to take a risk and go into business for himself. A community bank took my grandfather's assets, my dad's assets, and a guarantee from a vendor as collateral for a loan to purchase what was then called Illinois Supply Company. In those early years, my dad worked every job at the company. During the day, he went to see customers and secure orders, and then went back to the warehouse to pull and package them. The next day, he would make deliveries using my mom's station wagon before visiting more customers and taking more orders. Eventually, he was able to buy a truck and hire a driver, which left the station wagon free for my mom to pick up merchandise from vendors while my sisters and I were at school. After the doors closed at 5 o'clock, my dad would go to his office and perform both the accounts payable and accounts receivable functions. Every bit of profit he made got funneled back into the company so he could hire more people, buy more trucks, and expand his inventory. 40 years later, he heads a business with 8 branches in 3 states, 92 employees, and almost $40 million in revenue. My sisters and I take great pride in our family story, but we know that it's not unique. There are thousands of families that have similar histories, families who have decided to put everything on the line to pursue the American dream. And after years of hard work, successes and failures, and years of paying taxes on profits as they were earned, are forced to navigate one final hurdle: how to pass the business on to the next generation without losing some or all of it to the IRS in the form of estate taxes. What the authors and supporters of this bill clearly understand, and what I hope that members of both houses of Congress can finally embrace, is that the estate tax presents a real problem for family-owned companies. Businesses like ILCO, where the net worth is tied up in inventory, accounts receivable, equipment, and real estate, and where most profits are plowed right back into the business so that it can continue to grow, often must be dismantled in order to pay the estate tax. In our case, if something were to happen to our first generation and we were faced with a large tax bill, we would literally have to sell parts of the company to pay that tax. That would mean shutting down branches, laying off workers, or liquidating inventory just to be able to pay a tax bill that only occurred because an owner died. I am grateful to Senator Thune and Congressman Brady for continuing to push for full repeal of the estate tax because it is fundamentally wrong to place a tax on death. I applaud the efforts of those here today and those working behind the scenes to repeal it. We need to preserve the small businesses of today and encourage job creators of tomorrow to innovate and invest so that the United States continues to be the land of opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Thank you. Great. Jim Martin, 60 plus. And a heck of a three-point shooter.
As long as I'm not guarded. Look, on behalf of seniors and small businesses, here's an opportunity in the midst of gridlock for Democrats and Republicans alike to work for bipartisan fashion to repeal one of the most unfair, unpopular, and misunderstood of all taxes. Precedent is there. When repeal last passed the House, only to stall in the Senate, 40 Democrats, including 8 members of the Congressional Black Caucus, voted for repeal because the tax hurts minority and first-generation businesses. Surely these members cannot be accused of providing a tax cut for the rich. The rich across the liberal conservative spectrum set up trusts and foundations to avoid the tax. But for 20 years, we've moved the exemption from $600,000 to over $5 million, a rate from 55%, now 40%. But what we've actually done is made a lot of work for lawyers and lobbyists in this town. The 40% rate has been labeled permanent, but there's nothing permanent in this town except taxes. Already President Obama is trying to raise that 40 to 45 and beyond. You know, while I'm credited with renaming the estate tax the death tax, truth be told, Ronald Reagan and others said it before me, but I take pride in helping to move death tax repeal, along with others here today, to repeal it and move it from one goal line to the other. Chris Cox of California, John Kyle in the Senate were our leaders back then. Now our champions are Kevin Brady of Texas, John Thune of South Dakota. By the way, 20 years ago, Congressman McIntyre, the very first Democrat on that bill was Nick Joe Rahal of West Virginia. A USC law professor, Edward McCaffrey, who is a self-described unrequited liberal, he now says this tax is one that liberals should love to hate because, quite frankly, it will provide more jobs for workers if you get rid of the tax. I came to Washington as a reporter when President Kennedy was in the White House. I've witnessed and reported on a lot of history. I've seen a lot of taxes come. I've not seen many taxes go. If ever there was a tax whose time to go has come, it's this one. A tax that breaks up family-owned businesses. It's a cruel tax as well. If you're saying goodbye to a deceased loved one, Uncle Sam, not even a blood relative, in the guise of IRS agents, is the first claimant in line. Let's repeal this terrible job-robbing confiscatory tax for a fourth and final time. Thank you.
Hear, hear. Last up is Steve Fogelsong, who is the owner of Black Gold Ranch. So,
guess what I do for a living? Pretty good guess. Black Gold Ranch is actually a cow-calf outfit and a feed yard in west central Illinois. And I've been involved with the National Cattlemen's Beef Association for as long as I can remember, 20, 30 years. And this has been the item at the top of our docket for that long. I cannot imagine having to come back here time and time again and continue to talk about this because I just can't understand where we don't understand why this is such a bad law. I mean, it's one of those, are you kidding me kind of things. It doesn't make any sense that we would be in that mode at all. We should be way past that. And these guys, obviously, and ladies, you know, they're the A-team. They figured out that we've got to get this thing stopped because this is the death knell for a way of life that a lot of people would really love to embrace. My outfit's just a little bit different than some. You know, a lot of outfits have got generations and generations. I'm a first-generation rancher. My dad is a plumber, believe it or not, and my children have been working side by side with me to pay for a ranch. I mean, when we have a mortgage payment come due, they have made that payment. When we have our property taxes due, that are due actually next week, you know, they help make that payment. And then when I kick the bucket, they're going to get to do it all over again and pay for that. That doesn't make any sense to me, and I certainly wouldn't think it'd make any sense to you all, especially we've got a whole crowd of folks that are my kids' age, they're in their 30s, you know. Why would you want to pay for something and then be taxed and have to figure out how to pay for it again? Doesn't make any sense. Lots of things have been said. I can't repeat, no need in repeating what the cost of land has done and why that's the situation, but you know, that you wind up building an estate because farmers and ranchers aren't a very bright bunch. And I include my, you know, instead of after we cash in and we take our money, we don't run off to Cancun on a very regular basis and take a vacation. We don't buy a luxury automobile. What do we do all that money? We plow it right back into that dirt. Because as farmers and ranchers, we have a stewardship responsibility, and we have to figure out, you know, what we do with that cash to make it better. If you want to talk about sustainability and those sorts of things and feeding the public, why would, and I can't understand how we can have these two conversations, why would we be talking about wanting to keep family farms together to provide food and then continue to allow this tax to be there to be the demise of that tax? I would certainly hope that we can get lots and lots of support here and you all understand the passion in which all of us speak about it, and we appreciate the opportunity to come and talk this afternoon.
Thanks, Steve, very much. You don't spend much time in Cancun, huh? Okay. Anybody have any questions for any of us? Yes, sir.
Okay. Yes. Have there been any? What is the timetable for the bill? When do you expect to have hearings on it?
Well, I think probably right now it gets wrapped into the bigger discussion about tax reform, which I think you guys are embarking on in the House right now. Maybe Kevin can speak to that. Obviously, we'd love to get a hearing in the Senate Finance Committee on this subject. Max Baucus, who chairs that committee, actually voted yes on an amendment I offered during the budget to repeal the death tax. And believe it or not, we got 80 votes on a Mark Warner amendment to the budget that said we ought to either reduce or eliminate the death tax. So we think there's some bipartisan support out there for this. And I hope, again, that if the House proceeds with tax reform and the Senate follows, that we'll get an opportunity to get this issue front and center. Kevin,
no, John, you're exactly right. You know, in the House, we're moving forward and moving fundamental tax reform out of the Ways and Means Committee this year. We expect to have a majority of the House as co-sponsors of this bill, so we'll show very strong support for it. And since our goal is a pro-growth tax code, ending the death tax grows our economy, and the economic studies show it. And so we think that is our very best vehicle. People understand this issue. There isn't a whole lot more we need to know about it to know just how unfair and economically damaging it is.
Yes, have you identified specific offsets for this, or is it all just part of tax reform, rate reduction, or base project?
Yeah, it would in all likelihood be handled in that way. We don't have an offset in the bill, but typically when tax legislation is introduced, it doesn't include offsets. My assumption is in the current fiscal climate that we're in that we would probably look for ways to offset it. And if it is handled in the overall context of tax reform, then in all likelihood we would come up with a way of making the overall bill revenue neutral. But we've seen it scored by CBO. It's about $20 billion a year. It's about 0.5% of total federal spending. So, you know, as Senator Hatch mentioned before he left, it's not inconsequential, but in the overall scheme of things, 0.5% of federal spending doesn't get you very far, and particularly when you consider the impact that it has on the economy and on jobs. And that to me is something, it is unfair. It's punitive, but it's also, it really has an adverse impact on jobs. And there have been several studies that have pointed that out and talked about the number of jobs that could be created if we did away with the death tax. And anybody else feel free to speak up. Yes?
You mentioned that there were 80 senators who voted to repeal or reduce the estate tax. By my count, that leaves about 20 or so who voted against repeal, but for repeal or reduce. We're at 40% now. Have any of those 20 said what they think the rate should be that's less than 40 but more than 0? And how might we encourage them to tell the public what rate they would like to see?
Well, I mean, I can't speak exactly for what their thinking was when they voted for that. At the time, as you perhaps know, during a budget debate, the amendment to repeal it was, I said a couple Democrats, Joe Manchin voted with me on that, as well as Max Baucus. But on the repeal, or I should say eliminate or reduce, I think was exactly the language that was used in the Warner Amendment. The 80 who voted for that, it'd be interesting to see what they think that rate ought to be. I mean, I think that doing away with it entirely is the correct tax policy, but I can't speak to their motivations. But it was, I think, a cover vote, if you will. They didn't want to have to vote, you know, no on mine and not have something to vote for. But they are on record. They got 80 senators who voted to reduce or eliminate the death tax. And what that rate would be, I guess probably every one of them might have a different answer to that question. Oh, hey, Grover. All right. Grover Norquist, Americans for Tax Reform. You want to make some comments quick like here? We're just taking some questions right now.
Sure, absolutely. Look, we had a go at getting rid of the death tax. We came close. We sort of did it for a year, and we're continuing to chip away at it. We've made some progress. But as we look forward to tax reform, right now we tax income in the United States. When you earn a dollar, the government takes some. If you save it, they want to take some more on interest. If you invest in a company, there's a corporate income tax. If you get a capital gain, there's a capital gains tax. If you get a dividend, there's a dividend tax. And if you're stupid enough to die, they want to take up to 40%. What we're talking about is ending just the last part of that sentence, okay? This is part of tax reform. We need to ask ourselves whether we want to tax the dollar you earn again and again and again. And of course, it's completely a tax on lifetime savings. We want to encourage savings, not to discourage it. This is an important tax to get rid of. It's been nice to chip away at it. But it's like crabgrass or something. If you just cut it back, it shows up again. We really need to pull it out by the roots, send it away, and then work on the rest of tax reform.
Thanks. And on that point, the President proposed this year raising it up again. We were at 40% just as recently as last year in the fiscal cliff deal. He wanted to go back up to 45% and lower the limit back down to $3.5 million. So as was mentioned earlier, nothing around here is permanent as long as Congress can change it. But I think we could do something that really would be permanent if we would get rid of it once and for all. And obviously, that's something that everybody here endorses.
This is not exactly a new issue.
Why bring it up again? I mean, why at this particular time?
Well, I think that you know, we're in a sort of a sluggish economy. We've had anemic growth. We've got a high unemployment rate. We're looking for things that can kickstart the economy. This is a tax which fundamentally hurts the people who create jobs in this country. And plus, we're getting into a debate about tax reform, which I think is a perfectly appropriate time to have that discussion. And then I think, as I mentioned, put on top of that the fact that the President and his administration have come out in favor now of going back even on the rate and the exemption level that was put in place at the end of last year in the so-called permanent law. So I think it's very fitting that we move forward and try and address this now. Please, anybody else want to talk?
There's never been a better time. This economy is the weakest recovery since World War II. And we're missing 4 million jobs and $1 trillion out of our economy. And eliminating the death tax could not only create jobs, but help create new federal revenue, which again, growth is our strongest force for balancing this budget. So, in fact, there has never been a better time to eliminate this once and for all, especially whether in or out of tax reform, especially this year.
It seems like this is an issue that always is an easier issue for the Republicans to deal with than the Democrats. The Democrats have these fissures that would surface where then Senator Lincoln would be working with Senator Kyle on some sort of negotiation. Are there any Democrats out there, I know you mentioned some had voted for the non-binding votes for the budget resolution, are there any that you're working with on some sort of negotiated package this go around?
Well, there are Democrats that we've had conversations with in the Senate. And as I said, I mean, there have been in the past members of the Senate who've been available to us on these votes. And in fact, even those that have gone so far as to co-sponsor legislation. You mentioned Blanche Lincoln. She was a leader along with Senator Kyle on this issue. But we're seeking out Democrats right now. And so we're looking for people who really are serious, one, about getting rid of a tax that's very harmful to the economy, but secondly, one that really does punish and is very punitive toward the entrepreneurs in this country, the people who invest and work hard. And so we don't have a Democrat co-sponsor on the Senate version of the bill just yet. As Kevin pointed out, Mike McIntyre was here earlier, there are some Democrats, I think, in the House. But I think there are Democrats in the Senate that are sympathetic, as was evidenced by the vote. But it's a hard thing for them to do, to step out. This is an issue that for a lot of Democrats is a difficult one. But most of them, not most of them, but a lot of them represent constituencies not unlike the people that we represent here, who care very deeply about this. And when push comes to shove, I think we could get them on a vote. So we'll see where it goes from here and how the process unfolds, but I remain hopeful that there'll be Democrats who'll be willing to be with us on this.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just want to make a quick comment. It's such an unfair tax, and when you look at what it's doing exactly to our economy and the population today, women business owners and minority business owners are the fastest growing segment of new startups that we have in this country right now. Many of them are going to be captured by this tax for the very first time. That is one of the reasons why it is so imperative that we continue to push on this issue, is not only because of what it does to our economy, but what it does to new people who are getting into owning their own family business right now, and how it is adversely affecting women and minorities as they stick a lot of their capital into a new business that they want to have for their family. I don't have to go very much farther than my own personal story to tell you exactly what happened when we got hit with the death tax. We immediately let some of our rented land go because we knew that we couldn't afford to expand any farther. We had men that were working for us that we no longer could employ because we had to contract and we had to work harder ourselves. We didn't purchase any new machinery for the first 4 or 5 years. We sucked it in, and that certainly didn't do anything to stimulate the economy because we were so busy trying to figure out how we were going to make those payments to the federal government because we had a tragedy in our family. We don't want to see that perpetuated in other businesses across the country. Small businesses are faced with that exact same situation, as well as farms and ranches, and we absolutely need to make sure that it always stays on the front burner.
Yeah, that's as good of illustration of how this thing works, I think, as any of us could point out. But that story gets replicated hundreds and thousands of times across the country every single year. All right, one last question? Okay, yeah.
The alternative minimum tax, what kind, along with that tax repeal, what kind of effort is there being made to link the two together to get them both repealed?
Well, there are many of us who, of course, would love to see a lot of taxes go away. The alternative minimum tax we fix every year. We've consistently tried to minimize the impacts that it has. But that also is a very, it's a tax that has a very pernicious effect, because it was continuing to capture more and more people, including middle-class Americans. And when that tax was put in effect back in, what, 69 or sometime like that, it was designed to capture a few high-income folks, but obviously it's hitting an awful lot of people it wasn't designed to hit. And so, you know, from a tax policy standpoint, there are a lot of things we ought to do. Getting rid of the death tax would be number one, but certainly eliminating the effect of a tax that's designed, you know, that was designed specifically to hit high-income taxpayers, that's now creeping into and capturing an awful lot of middle-income Americans, would be a next good step. So I think that's all. Thanks, guys. Thank you very much. Thanks.